Hello there, you're watching the press preview. It's a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Well, it's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the former government special advisor Mo Hussein. Evening to both of you. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's have a look to see what is on some of those front pages. Are the theme the same on nearly all of them? The Mirror reports on the developing situation in Afghanistan, covering the suicide bomb that detonated on Thursday in Kabul. On that same story, The Express has the headline, "Two Brits killed waiting for freedom." The Telegraph quotes the Prime Minister saying he feels a great sense of regret that around 1,100 Afghans who served alongside British forces are unlikely to make it out of the country. Britain risks the biggest hostage crisis in history. That is according to the Daily Mail. And The Eye declares thousands abandoned to the Taliban. The Guardian has a very similar headline. And The Times hears Washington is planning retaliatory attacks on IS forces inside Afghanistan. In other news, the Financial Times says that ministers have called on businesses to hire UK-based workers. That's after furlough and strict immigration rules have resulted in a chronic shortage of lorry drivers. And the Manchester Evening News welcomes what it calls the sensational return of the footballer Cristiano Ronaldo to Man United with this headline, "Back home." Well, while the Star deems it the second coming of Cristiano. Well, as promised, we are joined this evening by Susie Boniface and Mo Hussein. Evening to both of you. It's been a hard week, hasn't it, of news, and those front pages really bear out what the world has been witnessing. We're going to talk first about the front page of the Daily Mail. As Susie, coming to you, it's referencing there's more than 1,000 people likely to be left by the UK government in Afghanistan who we couldn't get out in time, and saying that Britain risks the biggest hostage crisis in its history.
Yeah, and it's worth bearing in mind that sort of 1,100 or so people is the equivalent of 2 or 3 transport planes. That's just how close we were to getting everybody out who needed to be out. These are also just the ones that the MOD know about or will admit to. There may well be others who aren't going to get it across either. Now, one of the things that the government and various people in cabinet and so on are saying is, well, the next best thing that anyone who's in Afghanistan could do is get themselves to a refugee camp. Head for the borders, guys, and get to a refugee camp, and you can apply for a visa there. Now, the distance from Kabul to the nearest city in Pakistan, Peshawar, is about 200 miles, which is about the same as London to Manchester. And if you can imagine setting out from London with your entire family on foot through war zones, and imagine you're going past repeated roadblocks thrown up by fundamentalist lunatics who want to enslave your children, rape your wife, and shoot you in the head, and ask yourself if you'd feel like walking from Manchester to London or the other way around. You're not do it. Just saying it's just go to a refugee camp and apply through the visa process there. It's not a solution. Refugee camps, anyone who's been in them will tell you, are riddled with disease and crime in this part of the world, with terror recruiters, with all those who can't operate within Pakistan or Afghanistan. They're sort of fairly lawless places, and they're not the best place in the world to be sending people, especially when we've got responsibility to get out. The fact we've left those people is utterly shameful.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister, Mo, acknowledges that he's got an obligation. He says he's going to shift heaven and earth to get them out. I mean, it doesn't appear to have been confirmed that France is stopping its evacuation flights. Do you think he should keep them going a little longer?
I think you should. I think we owe a real debt to these people who have been working alongside our troops and our officials over the last 20 years. I just don't think it's good enough to just say the last 1,000, and it's probably more, as Susie says, cannot make it through just because of a self-imposed deadline by the US government. It is hard. It is hard for the UK to do this alone, but maybe with other countries, we could try and get a few more planes out there, because the alternative is that we are leaving these people to the Taliban and to the dehumanizing, inhumane treatment from them. And we're in a really strange position now, because a lot of references to the Taliban as the new government or somehow our security partners. I found it hugely ironic when the Taliban themselves spoke about the suicide attack yesterday and condemned it, when they themselves have committed so many of these. And there are real questions around how these people who committed the attack, ISIS-K as they're called, did so because they were let out of the prisons by the Taliban themselves. So we are leaving these people to the hands of a very oppressive medieval regime. And I do think we need to do everything we can. It's fine saying you'll move heaven and earth, but what are we actually going to do to help these people?
Yeah, I mean, it's echoed as well, isn't it, Susie, on the front page of the Telegraph, talking about the Prime Minister says it's his great regret that he has to leave people behind. There is talk of an imminent potential second terror attack in Kabul. What do you think? Does he have a choice?
I think that headline would be more accurate if it said PM speaks of great regret at leaving Brits behind, which is who they are. They're not foreign nationals. Many of them either work for us, they are British, they're related to Brits, and they've certainly got a very strong right to be British if they're not already. I think, and the Prime Minister within that copy actually refers to the fact that many of the 1,100 are UK nationals. All right, it's not Afghans left behind, it's Brits left behind. And that's what that headline completely fails to report on properly. But one of the things that's really interesting, you know, is that lots of talk has been going on about how, well, no one knew, always happened in a rush. And you know, this was agreed in February 2020 by Donald Trump's administration, the pullout, and it was going to be happening in May. It was going to happen much sooner than this. When Joe Biden took over in January, he set the date, moved it back and said it was going to be September. And France began evacuating their Afghan connections in April, I think it was, I saw today. Now, in July, Joe Biden changed his mind and said they'd be leaving in August. Now, that's very, very quick and it's far too rapid. But Britain has known for more than a year this was coming down the tracks. The actual date of departure has switched about a bit, but we knew. And in March, on March the 31st, I was just reading actually, the Home Office published guidance on the Afghan relocation scheme for interpreters. And that included saying that, you know, that it wouldn't apply to contractors, people who were contracted by somebody else but not directly employed by the UK government. It said that it wouldn't apply to people who hadn't worked for the government for more than 12 months. You had to work for the UK government for 12 months to apply. So if you were there for 11 months and 3 weeks and just as likely to be killed, you still weren't going to get in on the scheme. There was possibility of taking DNA tests, and it said in the guidance that it could take somewhere between 2, 4 or more weeks for decisions to be made. That was back in March. So between March and August the 18th, when the government suddenly realised it had to get its Afghan interpreters out sooner, you know, the Home Office sat in its hands and did nothing. This is not just...
Susie, let me bring in Mo here as somebody who has worked, you know, very much in the inner workings of Whitehall. I mean, governments know, don't they, whether it's US or British government, that they also have their domestic, well, primarily have their domestic audience to play to. So it's when you get headlines that what we see on the front page of the Daily Express, 2 Brits killed waiting for freedom, that it does come home.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very fair point. Headlines like this do chivvy on action and do get people to do things. I think it does point to an element of surprise. There probably was some kind of calculation that perhaps the Biden administration would take a slightly different approach, and perhaps the behind-the-scenes negotiations from all the other countries would change minds. Clearly, that hasn't worked, and there has been an overall failure of planning and a failure of intelligence. And you have a situation now where the very thing that Biden was talking about avoiding, ending these forever wars, preventing more American fatalities and now British fatalities. Unfortunately, this is exactly what we are seeing, and he is now having to commit to more military operations there rather than less. So in terms of planning, in terms of execution, this has been a dismal failure. And I don't think this is really about never leaving. It's not a binary choice, but it's about how you leave and doing it in a way that you avoided this complete and utter mess and the human cost, which is the worst part.
Yeah, well, we don't have time before the break, but I do just want to show our viewers this double spread inside the Mirror. It simply says about that terror attack in Kabul, killed by cowards. A double-page spread there talking about the growing threat to the people remaining in Afghanistan from ISIS-K, a group that we haven't heard much about, but I'm sure we'll be hearing plenty more about them in the days and weeks coming. One of the few papers to actually have a story featuring on its front page other than Afghanistan, Susie, is the FT. It's talking about the business secretary his call to hire UK workers, referencing the shortage we've seen in hauliers, which has resulted in the run on certain food products in the supermarkets.
Yes, and I just want to stop for a moment and think for the fact this is a guy who's in government, right, and is making really important decisions about how our country's run. And he has said that we can supply the failure of not having enough HGV drivers by just paying more and recruiting British people to be HGV drivers. Now, that would be great if, the average lorry driver is over 45, because it is a really difficult job that involves long hours, perhaps 15 hours a day, being a long way away from your family. It doesn't suit people who are younger. An awful lot of our unemployed people in this country at the moment are younger people. 6% of all jobs in June this year were actually people who were aged 18 to 24, and they were furloughed. There's 406,000 people under 25 who are unemployed. You can't just fix the HGV driver problem telling younger people to get an HGV license. It's not going to work. Plus, it raises the cost of food. It raises the cost of salaries throughout the supply chain.
It's not a simple fix, is it? I mean, Mo, what do you think? What's he going to have to do? Introduce laxer rules on immigration?
Yeah, well, this is really about the government trying to make more use of the post-Brexit immigration rules and the powers that they now have. And also there's a real awareness in government that the furlough scheme ends at the end of September, and there are still 2 million people or so who are on a full or partial furlough. So jobs will need to exist for these people to go on to, and for us to avoid this massive spike in unemployment, which the government has been avoiding so far by continuing the furlough scheme. I don't think ministers telling people what jobs that they should go into ever really works out well, but the thinking behind it is to avoid this cliff edge.
It's not going to go down well, is it?